Excellent. Okay, here we are. We've got 20 minutes open for questions. David, did you have any open questions that you had not had an opportunity to answer from earlier?
That's putting me on the spot. Let's just check.
It is.
It's interesting. There was a comment, I think more from the question from James about self-serving leadership. And that comes in lots of shapes and form. What I observe is that there's obviously a bigger shift in management systems around transparency across all levels and types. And I think people are more willing to call out leadership that is not based on integrity and authenticity. And so it will still happen. And frankly, you need a degree of ego to take on such a role. But when it becomes too much that direction, I think there are enough. I think there are enough pressures in the system and transparency in the system to call it out and challenge it and correct it or move it out, move the person or persons out. That was one comment.
That would really come back to values, right? I mean, is the organization living by its values or not?
Yeah, values and behaviors day to day,
Yeah.
in terms, and particularly in, we talked about mastering sort of critical moments. There are predictable, high impact, high energy, high stress moments that people look out for, and it's people watch you more in those moments than elsewhere. I remember talking with Carolyn McCall, who now runs ITV, who used to run EasyJet, and she was very clear to say actually she felt more in the spotlight when she was managing a crisis or a difficulty than in a more growth sort of context, like, I don't know, doing a deal or elsewhere, which sounds obvious, but often in those moments it's very easy to get stuck in the weeds and the minutiae and actually focus on the issue, which is important, and the solution, but lose sight of how you're coming across in those moments as well.
Right.
So that was very telling when she told me that. Those are some of the comments. I may have missed something else, but tell me if anybody else has any comments or questions.
Can I ask you a question on that? Do you think that that's because when you're doing transformation, everybody is much more anxious and everybody is scared and worried in many ways, even if they don't really know why or how? So they are looking at the CEO or manager or director or whoever. And if that's what I felt, at least whenever I ran any transformation as a CEO, that everybody was looking at me. And if I looked a bit worried or sad or didn't sleep enough, then everybody started talking about, oh my God, something really terrible is going to happen now. So for me, in a transformation role, the most difficult thing was always to keep a completely straight face or go cheerleading. And after a couple of years, that really drains you. But is there a way of dealing with that? Because I see more transparency now in the world as well, especially because of the startup ecosystems, that if there is a problem anywhere, everybody's going to talk about it. And especially the newer generations, they don't care. They will talk. So they will hold you to account, which is very different from how we were like 10 years ago.
That's a great point. And I completely agree with it. I think you would hope that the role of the leader over time is to create a safer and higher accountability and performance culture in which there is tension, of course, but actually their role is to call out the choices the organization's facing, the potential, the classic one is people fearing for their jobs and so forth. Right. That's the classic one. But I think you won't be able to be open about that all the time, but I think sometimes leaders internalize some of those decisions and choices, and hence the pressure brews up. Hence, they always feel they need to be, the perfect mask. And I think there is a certain performance in certain moments. There'll be performance when you're tired, when you're, bored of a particular situation. But I think it's the balance. If that is too much for your time, I think in those pressure moments, something will happen, or people who know you well enough will see it and see through you, and then the rumors start. So I think that the trick is to use the people you trust inside and outside the organization to sort of blow off steam and talk about things candidly, and do that very wisely. But secondly, this goes to my point about clarity, be really clear about what's going on now, what might happen in the future, what people can do and should do, and what they shouldn't worry about. And I think it's that bit that often gets sort of missed out, or it stays very top level corporate. It doesn't get into the, okay, what I'm asking you to do today or the next day is this.
That's really interesting. I guess then my next thought, and I won't take up much more time, would go back to what Scott said about his project, that you need those kind of key people within an organization who might not have the title, but who are well networked and well liked and trusted. Whatever they do, you always find these people that everybody kind of knows, who can help maybe with that message. I don't know.
John Katzenbach calls them the informal, authentic leaders.
Right.
And the selection and the nurturing of those people is an activity that is often underinvested.
Right. That was always my
let's go to the usual suspects, go to these people. But
right.
Actually, that's a really skillful activity and act of a leader. I agree.
Right. Thanks.
Great point.
Yeah, I would just add to that. If you're going to transform the business, you have to understand how you're going to do it in a way that people feel some safety as you're going through this. If there's not a feeling of safety, of course, then the environment becomes toxic very quickly. And your smartest and your best people will leave because they've already got 10 other job options. And this is part of the challenge in doing this. So on its own, transformation sounds fine. A lot of people transformation, but what does that really mean? And how are you going to do it in a way that you retain the talent you need to be successful in the future?
It's a sort of analogy, which I'm not sure it works completely, but there's something about, thinking of it as a series of, it is an overall marathon, yes, but it's a series of sort of sprints with proper rest. There's probably interval training. And frankly, a lot of the great people that Scott referred to will not stay for the whole journey, because genuine transformation in my book, and I spent time researching this thing, but 7, 8, 9, 10 years, longer. Well, it's not a 3-year gig. I mean, there will be examples, but not genuine transformation the way I defined it. Any other questions? Something I missed?
Jacobo's had a couple of questions about size of business. So would it be similar if the client is a small or medium-sized business? And have you focused mainly in large corporations? Do small and medium-sized business offer benefits from a consulting perspective? Do you want me to start that, David, or do you want to start it?
I've said enough for the moment.
I'll be my voice. No, it's opposite. Okay, so I've worked with both large and small-sized businesses. My focus is really on the middle market today. Middle market being that business kind of, if you look at the smaller companies, would be around 150, 200 million euros in sales. And then the upper end of what I would call middle market would end at about 2 billion. That's the range. I have worked with some of the largest multinationals, but actually I prefer the middle market, and that's a longer discussion. Do they receive benefits from this? Yeah, they do. Now, if a business is too small, I think it's much more difficult for the company to receive benefits from consulting. But then there can be other ways to approach that, similar to what we're doing, for example, with Scale Up Coach and with some self-service tools. The only reason with very small businesses I caution about consulting is often I'll say to the people who come to me, I'll say, you don't need a consultant, you need to hire a sales manager. Or instead of investing in a consultant, invest in your distribution channel for the United States. Not that I don't want to help them, it's just that resources are always competing for each other. And if I'm not the best resource or our teams are not the best resource, I don't want people investing there because long-term it won't be sustainable for anybody.
Yeah. My experience when I was a senior partner in strategy and was in large corporates, although I did work corporates, public and private sector, and I've been out of that for a year, actually more, about a year and a couple of weeks. So I'm sort of learning this new craft. Over the 25 years, I guess it's finding the right mix, because the corporates give often a credibility, which is very helpful, but the roles can be narrower sometimes, or more specialist. At the same time, in SMEs, you can actually you can have a much bigger impact, and they are more. This is a generalization, but I find them more willing and more open to sort of consider new things. So I found it was a bit like at a certain time, my colleagues, nobody would really get a lot of work out from the, the top 4 tech companies in certain areas. They just didn't buy, they would buy the consultants and give them a job as opposed to work with the consultants. But you wanted them in the portfolio for brand recognition and credibility, but you'd probably make your money elsewhere.
We had a question from Avier as well. What was the feedback from the company on doing this remotely versus their initial expectations? Look, Avier, I mean, we had something going for us in that the whole world was in the same position. And so no one was able to offer a in-person delivery because it was illegal. Now, today, the situation is changing a bit because you see some countries are going very quickly back to in-person, and other countries still have very restricted travels and borders. This will be a much more tricky period in order to manage that, in my opinion, than when everything was closed. We also had a second thing going for us on this project in that it was a digital transformation project. So the argument that we couldn't use digital technologies was pretty weak, in the sense that actually it was a plus that people were learning to use new tools and think about new business models and new ways. So we didn't have a pushback, Avier, in that area. But it will be interesting to watch what happens now, where different countries have really different approaches they're taking on opening things up or not opening things up, and what that means for your business as an advisor or a consultant. If you are in a country where you cannot travel or you cannot meet in person, and you have competitors or alternatives where they're able to do that, then the situation becomes much more difficult. And I will say, for creating relationships, the relationships that matter, I think a portion of that really needs to be done in person. There's a limit to what you can do on Zoom or Teams for creating a relationship. For maintaining a relationship, I think you can do a lot. But actually that moment of, hi, here's who I am, and here's why I'd like you to work with me, or vice versa, if you're able to do that in person, I think there's a big advantage to that. In my experience, for efficiency, for really bonding, back to some of what David was talking about earlier about, mirroring reactions and things. It's exhausting to attempt to do that with a screen, as opposed to going out for a coffee with a client and saying, let's just take out a piece of paper and write down what you're really thinking about today. That's my impression.
Interesting. One quick observation from a current project I'm working on. The client who's the sort of lead of this area, this sort of global lead of this area, he said he's gained more intelligence on the impact of his leadership team by working virtually, because you have to be much more intentional working virtually than you would be otherwise. And it's a higher bar, it's more intense. So actually, in terms of his getting sense of who's on board, who's performing, who's not performing, he wouldn't want to do it all the time, but he's had a lot higher quality data in which to inform his decisions about his future leadership team. Javier asked a question about how often do you see leaders taking into consideration their health and wellness as part of the equation. I think more now. I think there's more awareness and talk in organizations, particularly around mental health at the moment, and anxiety. So that's a leveler across all organizations. I'm going to say something controversial. It's that time of day, depending on where you are in the world, where the blood sugar goes down. So just to wake ourselves up, I would say men of a certain age are weaker at this than the women I've worked with. I work with about 50-50. And I'd say men I've worked with, so that's how I'm framing it, talk a good game at a superficial level about the importance of mental health and physical, but actually talking about it in an open way, say, by the way, that means therefore that it's important for us to not work all hours or take breaks, and the actions associated with it. I find in my case, women have been better at it. The sad thing is that there aren't enough women in senior leadership roles. That's a major issue. And the data that I had on an old study, which I can share perhaps in the link if I get a chance, showed that of a large sample of leaders who self-disclose their characteristics and traits, women are far more likely to be transformational leaders than men, and then look at reality. I just thought I'd throw that one in there just to see if we're all, you know, mic drop. You know,
No, actually, I
very
agree with
passionate
everything you said, but it's
big problem.
Yeah,
it is.
David, I think you are absolutely spot on with that comment. And I would even add another angle or dimension, which is taking into consideration the different culture as well and the different nationality.
Yes.
Just to give you an example, in my former role, I was leading a global foundation, for example, and one of our major initiatives was basically focused on mental well-being.
Yes.
And our two stellar projects, we had the two of them in Ireland and the other one in Australia. Okay, whereas I am based in Spain, for example, and that topic is getting more and more traction. But I mean, for the moment being, when you address it with specifically male CEOs, that's exactly the reaction that you were referring to. And thank God that's changing, but there is still a long way to go. And I think that should be one of the big areas for CEOs to be focused on for the next period, just to come ahead of us, specifically when returning back to the office and so on. And I mean, McKinsey, one of their recent articles, they were even referring to that you know, managing your well-being will become the most important leadership skill for the next 5-10 years.
And then I agree, Carlos. And then you ask people in that organization, my own BCG and others, and you say, okay, you can't suddenly do a 10-hour week, right? If you can, by the way, fantastic. I'd love to learn. But what are you practically doing to change your practices or mindsets as a result? Not just talk about it. It's interesting. I interviewed my old boss, Kevin Ellis, who's the head of the PwC UK in the Middle East, and I can now ask him any question I like, and I did. He talked about mental health prevention, which the firm has done a great job on. And I said, so what are you doing to nurture it? That's the shift.
Yeah.
And he gave a good answer, but it's like, that's the shift. It's not just about the helplines and the psychologists available and everything. That's important. That's after the event. Get in earlier.
Yeah.
Stop the bullying. You know, it's not a PwC point, just to be clear. What I'm going to say is stop the micromanagement, stop the bullying, stop the presenteeism, all the things that cause, you know, mental health issues.
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox again.
No, David, that is a great place to end at because we're just running out of time. Olga, in terms of your question on organization and helping them prepare and align their culture, there's an article that David and Chris wrote recently for the Harvard Business Review. I think it's pretty much on that. Adelina, do you mind to put that in the chat if you haven't already? The HBR article from Chris and David.
Yes,
and
I've posted it. I'll repost it again.
I think Stefan just did.
Okay, thanks.
It's a really long question, so I appreciate it, Olga, but we don't have time here. This article, though, starts to touch on where that's going. From my side, I want to say thank you very much. Thank you, David, for taking time out of your schedule.
Yeah, sure.
To
Pleasure,
Adelina and to Hina for the extraordinary amount of organization that goes into putting together an event like this, and to all of the partners. Now, when you come back at 4:40, you will again have to choose a track. And we have two tracks, one on entrepreneurship and one on clusters and ecosystems. And personally, I don't know how I will choose because they both look really good. But we will see you back at 4:40 CET, Norway time. So it's about 18 minutes from now. And you can decide, Adelina again has posted in the chat, which track you want to join. This room will be closed off. And so you need to choose one of those rooms, which you can see from the agenda that was sent out. And thanks, I'll see you for the rest of the summit later today.